All right, let me do an audio check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Audio seems good. Um, cool. Let's just get into this today, shall we? All right, quick recap. This is a read-along where I try to uh, live stream every week liberation news articles of me reading them and then giving my quick analysis, opinions. Feel free to chime in on the chats with your own opinions if you have any, and I'll read them out and we can discuss and eventually have more guests on. Cool. But again, this is just for my benefit to keep me reading all these articles all year. And for anybody else's benefit, if they can't read it, if they want to listen to it on the road, whenever they have a chance. I'm not professional. This is not funded. This is fully voluntary. I do suggest using the links in the description, though, to support Liberation News if you can, or any other leftist outlet that produces great articles. All right, cool. So the first article for today is U.S. imperialism has never been beyond the purview of the American Medical Association, written by medical students for justice in Palestine, July 23rd, just a few days ago. And it begins. In 2022, former American Medical Association President Dr. Gerald Harman released a statement strongly condemning Russia's military actions in Ukraine, calling the targeting of civilians and healthcare workers, quote, unconscionable, end quote. Subsequently, the AMA Foundation contributed 100,000 to Ukraine and adopted two policies to support the flow of humanitarian aid into the country. The AMA House of Delegates also advised that state medical boards grant hardship waivers for all international medical graduates affected by the conflict. In stark contrast, since October 7, 2023, the AMA has refused to condemn the U.S.-funded destruction of hospitals and murder of more than 500 healthcare workers. In November, the medical students sections and residents and fellows section put forth a resolution calling for a ceasefire, while the AMA Board of Trustees released a statement on the, quote, humanitarian crisis, end quote. The ceasefire resolution itself was dismissed from further consideration at the November interim meeting. In June, when the AMA convened at its annual meeting, the MSS and RFS reintroduced the ceasefire resolution in addition to a new item, Resolution 610, called on the AMA to oppose U.S. funding to entities that violate international law, denouncing the use of collective punishment in regions such as Gaza. Resolution 603 called for a, quote, ceasefire, end quote, in Gaza to protect civilians' lives and healthcare personnel. Those in support of the resolutions frequently mentioned the horrific imagery they had seen from Gaza of bombed hospitals, mass graves, and beheaded children. One supportive physician introduced herself, saying that her only conflict of interest was, quote, being a pediatrician, end quote. On the other hand, a delegate opposed to the resolution called them, quote, highly divisive, end quote, and worried that it could result in, quote, further declines in AMA membership, end quote. Multiple delegates claimed that isolating Israel's actions specifically was anti-Semitic. In response, many Jewish physicians and medical students condemned this weaponizing of anti-Semitism to defend genocide. The most common opposing argument echoed former AMA president Dr. Andrew Gurman's sentiment that the taxpayer-funded bombing of hospitals was a, quote, geopolitical issue, end quote, that, quote, goes beyond the purview, end quote, of the largest medical advocacy organization in the country. When it came to a vote, the AMA once again refused to demand a ceasefire, opting instead to pass, quote, alternate resolution 603, end quote, calling for, quote, peace, end quote, instead. But how can peace be accomplished without a permanent and lasting ceasefire? And why should peace exist in the absence of justice? Why has AMA leadership only ever spoken out against U.S. adversaries and never once condemned a U.S. funded military action? This selective empathy extends a nearly 200-year-old AMA tradition of hiding behind, quote, medical neutrality, end quote, to avoid extending humanity to women and colonized people. AM's tradition of, quote, medical neutrality, end quote. The AMA was founded in 1847 with the intention of, quote, standardizing, end quote, medical education and practice to gain legitimacy as the voice of the profession. Quote, maternal, end quote, healthcare professions were excluded and issues of race and gender were sidelined. In the post-Civil War period, the founder of the AMA, Nathan Smith Davis, argued the decision of admission for women and black physicians should be left to local societies. In 1870, the AMA enshrined this perspective, voting 114 to 82 that issues of racial and gender discrimination were, quote, not of a nature to require the action of the American Medical Association, end quote. At the turn of the 20th century, the AMN commissioned the Flexner Report, a controversial survey of U.S. medical education ostensibly aimed at elevating the scientific rigor of the medical profession. However, the report also resulted in the closure of all but two black medical schools. The report argued that, quote, the Negro needs good schools rather than many schools, end quote, and that black medical school curricula should accentuate, quote, hygiene rather than surgery, end quote. This created a shortage of black physicians that still exists today. In addition, while medical schools rightly embraced the biomedical sciences, courses in public health, preventive care, and indigenous health concepts were sidelined. In addition, while medical schools rightly embraced the biomedical sciences, courses in public health, preventive care, and indigenous health concepts were sidelined. This imbalance ultimately led to a healthcare paradigm focused on individual patient care and acute interventions rather than addressing their underlying social conditions. Medical missions exported this model to U.S. colonies acquired through the Spanish-American War, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. The primary funding for the Flexner Report came from Andrew Carnegie, who donated extensively to social causes under the explicit belief that philanthropy could positively sway public perception of capitalist businesses. To help win the heart and minds of medical schools and professionals, oil baron John D. Rockefeller continued in Carnegie's footsteps, giving millions to medical universities and hospitals. The Rockefeller Foundation also funded infectious disease eradication programs. Unsurprisingly, these efforts were driven by profit, not altruism. Hookworm and malaria had immense negative impact on less attractive. The foundation systematically favored, quote, vertical, end quote, programs, which favored pharmaceutical approaches to target specific diseases rather than comprehensive, quote, horizontal, end quote, health programs that offered a full range of preventative and curative services. Business magnates, oil barons, and pharmaceutical companies successfully popularized a culture of healthcare that largely ignores the social underpinnings of illness. The AMA has fully adopted this view, becoming one of the major lobbies against universal healthcare. This rationale of, quote, medical neutrality, end quote, is only possible within a culture that has normalized the myth of a, quote, apolitical health, end quote. Rudolf Virchow once said that, quote, medicine is a social science, and politics is nothing else but medicine on a larger scale, end quote. Often regarded as the founder of modern pathology, Virchow is widely known by medical students for his many biomedical contributions. However, many are unaware that he was also a revolutionary who participated in the Berlin uprisings of 1848. Through his study of pandemics, Virchow developed a theory of disease and human suffering that saw medical conditions as a primary driver of health. If we take this seriously, then healthcare workers have a moral obligation to go beyond the clinic. We must confront the global systems that reproduce these conditions. We must fight not just for a ceasefire, but for an end to imperialism, the common thread linking the suffering of poor and oppressed people around the world. Quote, there is a difference between peace and liberation, is there not? You can have injustice and have peace. You can have peace and be enslaved. So peace isn't the answer. Liberation is the answer, end quote. Quenture. I think that's how you say it, Quenture. And the featured photo was medical students and healthcare workers protest at AMA's failure to condemn the genocide in Gaza. Photo credit medical students for justice in Palestine. All right. So yeah, this is very important. We live in a capitalist system that rewards ghouls. That's what I always say. And where are the ghouls? Everywhere where you can make a profit. If you have a for-profit medical system, then their best answer to dealing with medical issues and health issues is not to cure, but to just treat uh, illnesses, to treat the symptoms, not to prevent, not to actually make people healthier. This is why we have this big brainwash and propagandizing of individualism in America, where everybody's telling, well, you should eat what you want and you should have guns because it's the Second Amendment. Um, no, you shouldn't eat what you want. Uh, you should be educated so that you want to eat properly. Um, Once you are educated, uh, once you have knowledge, once you have experience, once you have discipline, you know better than to drink 6 beers a night, eat nothing but McDonald's 9 to 5. And don't forget that it's also a systemic issue where we have food deserts where people have nothing else to eat but McDonald's because it's cheaper, because it's all they can afford or all they have time for. Personally, I've never been a fan of fast food. When I did used to eat it, and it never sat well with me. I've had times where I've enjoyed it, but I've always preferred just cooking rice at home or pasta, right? That's just my idea. And dropping some broccoli in there somewhere. I'm frying the occasional chicken or steak or whatever, even though I try to stay away from meat as much as possible. But yeah, these health issues, these are not just health issues here at home, but it's a world health issue when it comes to medicine that everyone deserve. In a time of plenty, no one should go without medicine and health care and hospitalization if necessary. The fact that the AMA is clearly taking sides here is disgusting, and it would be better off dissolved for a new system to be created that treats medicine as a health issue, not as a profit issue. As said here in the article, the AMA does not want to support universal health care. Therefore, it is not medically inclined to do what's best for the patient. So, therefore, it is a useless organization. Uh, it is just a capitalist organization, just like APAC, just another fundraiser for capitalists. Cool. Just like another branch of like NATO, that it's totally useless unless it's for capital gain. So, my opinion on this article, great article. I didn't know much about the AMA as in regards to how much control they had. I didn't know how they raised funding to send to Ukraine, but uh, don't raise funding or treat the issue in Gaza equally as unhealthy and harming. Um, so there's a clear bias, and it's clearly motivated by capitalism, by greed. Uh, so yeah, no need for them. Start a better, stronger organization that actually cares about people's health. And an organization that does care about people's health would be an organization uh, that, or an association that supports universal health care, which makes health care, medicine, and treatment available to all people to the highest quality, regardless of whether you're rich or poor. All right, cool. So that is my thoughts on that article. Get out of here, little checkbox. All right, and let me go back here. Not too many articles today. Uh, Caught up on the long night that I streamed for I think like 3 hours, or I think it was 2 hours of reading. But yeah, so that was donations. That was U.S. imperialism has never been beyond the purview of the American Medical Association. Sonia Massey. Uh, I've seen a lot of articles, a lot of videos on this. Let me get back to this one in a second. I gotta check the out. Just Move along somehow, right? Cool. Nobody minds. Right? No comments. Gonna keep reading here. Cool. So, as usual, I'm gonna read the title, read the article, and save my analysis or thoughts for the end, and try to keep them short. Uh, cool. And I think I can wedge in a little philosophy and stoicism, general philosophy into this at the end, because there's definitely a moral to the story. Uh, so, as the title reads, Sonia Massey, another tragic murder in the cops' war on Black America. Uh, Written by Tara Sandlin, July 26, 2024. Photo is of Sonia Massey. I don't know, Massey or Massey. I don't know. All right. But reading on here. On July 6, Sonia Massey was brutally murdered by Sangamon County, Illinois sheriff's deputy after she called the police to ask for assistance with a potential intruder. Like Breonna Taylor, Charlene Lyles, and Atatiana Jefferson, Massey was a black woman tragically murdered by police in her own home. When sheriffs arrived at Massey's home, they did not find an intruder outside and went inside to look around. Finding no one else, they began barking orders at Massey, escalating the interaction immediately. Massey complied with all the officers' instructions, including removing a pot of water from the stove, and said, quote, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus," end quote. In response to mere words from an unarmed woman in her own home, Deputy Sean Grayson pulled out his weapon and shouted expletives, expletives at as he threatened to shoot Massey in the face. Massey immediately set down the pot and went to kneel on the ground with her hands up. Despite Massey having no pot in hand, Grayson repeatedly shouted at her to, quote, "drop the fucking pot," end quote, and shot her multiple times while she was already on the ground. The Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board records show that Grayson, 30, worked 3 full-time and 3 part-time jobs in 4 police departments and 2 sheriff's offices over the past 4 years, all within the state of Illinois. And court records show demanding justice for Sonia Massey. The public pressure, no doubt, contributed to the eventual release of the horrific and violent body camera footage. Demonstrators chanted and held signs reading, quote, "Black Lives Matter," end quote, and, quote, "say her name," end quote, refrains too often heard as a result of racist police violence in America. Grayson, the cop killer, has been charged with murder. That criminal charges were levied is a testament to the power of the people's movement against racist excuse me, that criminal charges were levied is a testament to the power of the people's movement against racist police terror in Springfield and across the United States. According to her family, Massey was a descendant of William Donegan, a black man who survived a lynching by a white mob during the infamous 1908 Springfield race riots that took 17 black lives over the course of 2 days. Those horrendous August massacres led to the creation of the NAACP, and clearly the war on Black America has not ended. As one of Sonia's family members said, quote, "The more things change, the more they stay the same," end quote. The entire racist, sexist system of policing makes working class and oppressed people less safe. Quote, "Don't hurt me," end quote, Massey said when the deputies arrived at her house. Working class people No cops are dangerous and even deadly. Grayson's words and actions prove this in the extreme. As Massey took her last breath, former Deputy Grayson said, quote, "The fucking bitch was crazy," end quote, and then directed other officers not to provide medical assistance. This killer cop had no regard for Sonia Massey's life, despite court documents citing Massey as, quote, "calm, possibly unwell, and non-aggressive," end quote, and her having assured Grayson that she was doing okay mentally and had taken her medicine. His actions show the blatant disregard and criminalization of a person with a potential mental diagnosis. The heartbreaking footage confirms what we already know. This killer cop perpetrated the cold-blooded murder of a civilian who had requested help. In this case, unlike many other instances of racist police terror, the killer cop was virtually charged with murder. This would not have been possible without the mass uprising of 2020 after the brutal murder of George Floyd by racist killer cop Derek Chauvin. But this is not enough. Former Deputy Grayson believed he could act with impunity, which indicates just how guilty the entire U.S. system of policing is. Police have killed over 700 people already this year, putting 2024 on track to become the deadliest year of police killings since 2013. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have opportunistically used Massey's murder to call for the passage of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which Harris co-authored in the Senate. Of course, reforms that would end qualified immunity, no-knock entry, excessive force, and other forms of police violence are a step in the right direction. But we shouldn't be fooled. Kamala Harris built her career on mass incarceration policies that led to huge numbers of Black Americans being locked up. She aggressively pursued nonviolent drug charges, supported the use of prison labor, locked up parents over truancy, and supported the death penalty. To really end the war on Black America, we need to get rid of this racist capitalist system once and for all. Sonia Massey, Breonna Taylor, Tatiana Jefferson, and all the victims of racist, sexist, police terror deserve a whole new system. A system where Black women can feel safe in their own homes. We need a system in our control that meets our needs for housing, healthcare, and education. A system in which no woman feels compelled to say to the people who are supposed to help her, quote, "Please don't hurt me," end quote. All right. Um, let's start with just a quick Stoic view on this. Uh, so Sonia was ill, and the cop saw that she was ill. That's why he said that she was crazy, or justified it as a reason to shoot her dead blank in the head and end her life. Any virtuous person that does good deeds would have assessed the situation, noticed that she had a pot of hot boiling water, calmly stepped away and told her to put away the pot, or told her to drain it in the sink, for everybody's safety. Because she did seem to cooperate. She did seem to, it seemed like she was following directions. Uh, as Stoics and just normal human beings, the moral is that you should always be kind to people, even when they're not kind to you. Not just because it's your job, but because it's a way to pay it forward without expecting anything in return. Um, if this cop, if this police officer, if this human being would have known anything about perhaps being kind, being stoic, being cool-headed, this had not happened. But because it doesn't seem to be a priority for cops, police officers to be taught discipline in the academy, he obviously had no sense of discipline or virtue or worth of other people's lives. There's videos that show that she eventually did pick up the pot and threw it at him. But why did he get closer to her when he had a gun? He obviously had the advantage of long-range weapons, And when she did spill the water or try to throw it at it, it barely flowed up to his feet. Uh, Instead of charging up to her to control her, he should have steadily backed away and spoke calmly. There was plenty of other options of other things to do other than shoot her in the head too. Had she attacked physically, he could have shot her in the shoulder. This lady was like half his size. It was a 110-pound lady, maybe smaller, up against a 210-pound 6-foot officer. Uh, he could have easily controlled the situation without a gun. The other view on this is that it is racist, whether people want to say it was not a racist act or not. It is racist due to the fact that the system is systemically racist and puts generally minorities into these bad situations, because generally cops that are not properly trained or trained to just be violent are usually dealing with minorities when they deal in poorer neighborhoods. That's just statistical. So it is racist. It is a racially charged situation, uh, because it is systemic racism. Okay. Uh, Perhaps he wasn't racist. Maybe he was just a full-blown crazy person, mentally ill himself, that would have shot at anybody's head. But as we know, statistically, this mostly happens to minorities. So again, it's not necessarily that he's fully racist, or maybe he's ignorant that he's racist, but it is that the system is racist. Okay. All right. Uh, this goes back again to why, as leftists, socialists, and Marxists, and activists, and even as Stoics and humanitarians, we think uh, logically that we should abolish the police, because they came from the slave catchers from the 1800s, uh, and that's what they evolved to be police officers. They are the heavy hand of the law. They are the brute force. Uh, and I think the statistic is that out of all police crimes, only about 5% are solved. Uh, Very low statistic. Most of them are not. Uh, so most of the time, they're just showing up, filling out reports, and nothing's ever done. Right? A better system would be a restorative justice system, a system that educates and prevents and creates jobs and creates support, so that it reduces crime. Officers do not reduce crime. Throwing more money into police officers and police stations and their weapons and their gear does not reduce crime. Uh, Putting people in jail at a young age does not reduce crime. Uh, it just hones them and trains them to be better criminals when they get out. Um, what statistically does reduce crime is universal health care, uh, housing for all, equal education for all, uh, minimum living wages for all, uh, producing jobs for all. This sounds like a crazy idea, but it's totally doable. Totally doable. Just look around you. Look at how much is created, how much is produced every day. And it's all done with the magical power of money? No, it's done with the physical power of human labor when people come together and produce things. Money does not need to exist for that. Capitalism does not need to exist for that. Uh, capitalism has perhaps seen its best days, and it's in a decline. That's just that. Um, so that is my thoughts on this article. As well as, don't forget that these cops are not trained to be peaceful. They are trained to be aggressive. They are trained to be authoritarian, uh, and they are easily triggered. And I think another statistic is that about 20% of cops do steroid drugs, which means 1 in 5 of them are ready to be violent. Another statistic is that over 45% of cops uh, have uh, reports of spousal abuse. Uh, so about 40%, 45, I think it's closer to 40%, uh, uh, have reports of domestic abuse. This police officer had 2 DUIs and was given enough opportunities. Honestly, he shouldn't have been a police officer with a gun. He should have been a meter maid until he got his issues worked out and worked his way back up. But there's no work your way back up with police because you can get straight out of high school and go into being a cop without any education, without any psychological therapy or training. And in a few months, you're out there hitting the beat with a gun, getting unlimited amounts of ammo to practice shooting people in the head that called you to help them. Uh, I would say to police officers, please get a decent job. This ain't it. All right. Cool. And unfortunately, for those cops that are good and well intended, you can't change that kind of corrupt system from the inside. It's going to change you because you're going to want to keep your job. All right. So I say if you're thinking about joining the police force, don't. Don't. There's more fulfilling jobs out there. Just do that and live a peaceful life. Cool. All right. Let's move along to the next article. So there's only 3 articles today. Let's see. It's time for Cuba to take the U.S. state-sponsored terrorist list. I read that. PSL statement: the attempted assassination of Trump and its political fallout. I read that. Uh, Interesting insight into the Trump assassination attempt. Now with Biden being out, I think it's actually going to be a closer race because simply Kamala is going to get a lot of votes just on identity politics because she's a woman, she's Indian, she's black, uh, and she's a top cop. So a lot of centrists, a lot of liberals, they're actually going to probably lean towards her. So it's going to be a close race. Me, of course, I don't think either of them are going to be good for America. We've been in constant decline for the last 6 decades, and that's not going to change with these two. All right, let's check the audio. Audio check 1 2 1 2. Everybody hear me? Great. Cool. Hopefully the audio is better with this camera than with the last one when I used to stream. Maybe I'll throw a few pictures back there eventually, or throw a little key lighting, key backlight. Uh, I don't know. I don't think it's necessary. Like I said, this is mostly for read-alongs. And let's see. Wow, 40 minutes in. All right, let's go to the next article. This article reads, excuse me, if sometimes I act kind of goofy when I read, it's just trying to let loose, relax, to take it in better, take the information in better. That's just my way of doing things. All right. So next article title is Democracy on the Ballot? Fighting the Far Right in Election Season by Eugene Purrier, July 27, 2024. Right. Eugene always writes solid ones. So I'm going to take my time with this one, try to read it a little slower, try to take it in. Uh, and the photo here is of Kamala Harris in Iowa in 2019. Credit Wikipedia comments. And of course, she's given that cop vibe. The article begins. The most common refrain from Democratic Party officials about why you must vote for them is that, quote, democracy is on the ballot, end quote. In other words, the election of Trump will guarantee the United States will become a fascist dictatorship. Many who would consider themselves, quote, progressives, end quote, radical, end quote, even, quote, revolutionary, end quote, feel the same way and are gearing up to support Kamala Harris's campaign. It's an unimpeachable fact. The influence of the far right is growing, including semi-fascist and fascist groups. However, most of these arguments elide the key question: is voting for the Democrats the most effective way to challenge the rightward moving direction of the nation's politics? The real threats facing working and poor people are not party specific. They are rooted in the dynamics of a capitalist system struggling to secure its own reproduction. Capitalists have been waging a vicious war against the working class, facilitated by both parties, who are tasked not only with driving the process forward, but also with trying to contain its impact to avoid the system becoming totally destabilized. Grasping these deeper dynamics illuminates the need for a different approach, one rooted in building a true ideological counterforce to the status quo that can reshape the political terrain in favor of the working class. The right answer. The impact of the Great Depression on elites, the ruling class, was substantial. It shifted the center of gravity of elite decision-making towards attempting to manage the natural conflict between classes under capitalism through a more, quote, generous, end quote, provision of social reforms. This consisted of policies like Social Security, etc., broad recognition of unions and their wage pension demands, and government responsibility, at least in the abstract, for regulating business in the public interest (parentheses, clean air, affordable housing, etc.). End parentheses. Such an agenda was underpinned by, first, the possibility of serious destabilization presented by the 1930s, and then second, the explosion of profitability launched by the Second World War's war economy that was carried over into peacetime, the, quote, military-industrial complex, end quote. From 1945 to 1965, corporate profit rates ranged conciliating more conciliating policies towards a strategically decisive sector of the working class and oppressed communities. However, since 1969, profit rates have struggled to top 17%, as we've said elsewhere. Quote, relentless focus on profit is core to capitalism. This obsession with profit is the system's motor engine, end quote. A significant decline in the return on investment for capitalists required a paradigm shift. That shift has become known as, quote, neoliberalism, end quote, expanding production in the developing world, quote, parentheses, globalization, end parentheses, attacks on public spending, and progressive taxation, parentheses, austerity, population. This 4-decade-long ruling class offensive is the root of the shift to the right in American politics. It is not happenstance, but a conscious political choice by the large donors who control politics to shift the bounds of, quote, acceptable politics, end quote, rightward. Bipartisan repression and the right. The political center will continue to move to the right as the ruling elites attempt to cement their rule amid tectonic global shifts in ecology and geopolitics. An expansion of, policing, imprisonment, and mass surveillance to contain social discontent, expressed in an organized way or in unorganized uprisings, has been a key component of the 40-year right-wing offensive. The growth of social unrest is directly correlated to the policies themselves. The growth of militant action to stem the climate crisis has been met with a raft of draconian laws to protect, quote, critical infrastructures, end quote. The 2014-2020 uprisings have prompted a wave of, quote, cop cities, end quote, to bolster state repressive forces. This has been accompanied by a, quote, crime, end quote, panic that has promoted significant spikes in police funding and recruitment, in addition to spurring a return of, quote, law and order, end quote, politics in even the most, quote, liberal, end quote, localities. As the housing crisis increases across the nation, the Supreme Court has declared open season on clearing out the homeless. This has gone hand in hand with fear-mongering around migration, prompting more border militarization and an expanded network of immigration detention. This is all topped off with a combined effort between the mainstream media, tech giants, and agents of the national security state to brand oppositional activity as, quote, foreign influence or directed misinformation or disinformation, end quote. What is important is that these are all completely bipartisan policies, reflecting that both wings of the ruling class political establishment are preparing to not resolve the political opposition to their agenda of, at best, half measures. This is critical to the relationship of the 2024 election to fascism. Historically and contemporarily, there is an intertwined relationship between the formal agents of repression and the extra-legal networks of fascist organizations, like the Ku Klux Klan, the John Birch Society, or the Oath Keepers. These are not just two negative policies among many, but foundational policies facilitating a far more repressive society. An imperial agenda drains resources from productive and socially important goals and predicates national regeneration on racist fear-mongering narratives, making it impossible to mobilize the resources to solve the social being exploited by the far right. Practicing in the growth of the police, participating in the growth of the police, border patrol, and NSA spying, etc., expands not just the formal levers of repression, but the broader social base of right-wing police, state politics, pushing for repressive rather than conciliatory responses to the social movements and social fallout from profit above all policies. Disrupting these tendencies is the precondition to checking the overall drift to the right and closing down the political space being exploited by the fascist and far right. The China factor. The unwillingness of capital to offer solutions that meet the scale of the problem is linked to the principal geopolitical conflict of the era, the Cold War-style confrontation with China. China, as a second economic center of gravity, restricts the ability of imperialism to engage in untrammeled profit-making. As such, kneecapping China's economic growth throughout sanctions and tariffs is a key component of the current phase of the 40-year capitalist offensive. The extension of these new Cold War policies to Russia, Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela increasingly fragments the world into competing economic blocs, slowly slowing global growth, perhaps as much as 7 to 12%, increasing poverty, hunger, migration, negative climate impacts, and generally deepening the social crisis in which the right wing is thriving. Further, it directly siphons off resources that could be devoted to social spending and conditions all large government investments their usefulness for, quote, great power conflict, end quote. Also, quote, bipartisan policies, end quote. And even more than their, quote, domestic, end quote, counterparts are censored and demonized. Let me read that paragraph again. Further, it directly siphons off resources that could be devoted to social spending and conditions all large government investments on their usefulness, great power conflict, end quote. These are also, quote, bipartisan policies, end quote, and even more than their, end quote, counterparts are censored and demonized. What is to be done? A true course correction can only be delivered by a new force that can unsettle the status quo, one that can turn the seething discontent sweeping the nation into a recognizable political force. We've seen glimpses in the 2020 uprising and the recent upsurge in the Palestinian solidarity movement, where a variety of actions, large and small, caused society to react to radical demands and consolidate majority support for more modest but still significant progressive ideas. Sustained progressive is inhibited by the lack of a political excuse me. Sustained progress is inhibited by the lack of a political instrument through which the millions swept up in these events can combine their experiences and resources. That is, a working class political party in direct contrast to the capitalist parties, demonstrating that socialism is superior to capitalism at proposing solutions that meet the scale of the problems facing the majority of people. One study in 2022 found that 36% of people had a quote positive end quote view on socialism, 6% very favorable. Among Black Americans, those numbers were 52% respectively. For Latinos, 41% and 7%, and Asians, 49% and 9%. For those 18 to 29, 44% had a positive view on socialism, 9 very positive. Among those who were low income, 45% had a positive view, 10% very positive. Numerically, this would mean that overall there are 15.49 million people who have a very positive end quote view of socialism, 3.1 million of them Black, 3 million of them Latino, and 6 million Asian, and 4.7 million of those with a very positive view end quote, of socialism are 18 to 29, with 5 million considered quote low income end quote. These figures represent a wealth of human material which to build an alternative These figures represent a wealth of human material by which to build an alternative now towards the counterforce. What are the basic principles for an alternative that can disrupt the status quo? No positive change is possible without central planning. These are certain amounts of resources, both human and material, on Earth. There are also certain amount of needs and wants and just and efficient mobilization of resources is required to secure the basic needs of society first and foremost: food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, education, and access to information. In addition to managing beyond the basics of what we need, we ought to mobilize resources for the things we want. The market has already proven it is incapable of doing that. The major sectors of the economy need to be democratically owned and centrally directed if we want to move from a profit-centered to a people-centered economy. The war economy must end. A rapid shift in societal priorities must rest on reorienting the use of gigantic resources for wars and the military-industrial complex towards socially useful investments. In April, Congress passed a $95 billion aid package to fund Israel's genocide in Gaza, a proxy war in Ukraine, and military encirclement of China, while that same leadership could only muster $4 billion to keep our dams bursting from disrepair. Not even enough. To address even the most dangerous of dams, The government is also spending $1.7 trillion on the F-35, equal to 20 years worth of federal government spending on all housing programs. The fight against racism and oppression is essential. The hierarchy of difference in discrimination in the United States is a major obstacle to empowering the working class. subsets of nation based on race, gender, national origin, etc., are disproportionately subject to lower wages, higher poverty, mass incarceration, and housing insecurity, among other things. Bringing down the standard of living for all creates fighting over the maintenance of relatively, quote, privileged, end quote, access to opportunities and resources. In other words, we fight over crumbs, as opposed to demanding access to the whole meal and the kitchen that made it. The time is now. Beneath these general principles is a much deeper and detailed discussion of everything we need to change to, to ensure everyone has a dignified life. These 3 points speak to the general direction a world-class political project must speak to in order to disrupt the current political arena. Most importantly, these discussions can't wait until, quote, after the election, end quote, or the other points often made by those trying to shift support to the Democratic Party. Every 2 to 4 years, there are so many who say, quote, next time, end quote, a time which never comes. The challenges facing the working class and humanity writ large are too significant to delay. The 2024 election offers us an opportunity to specifically fight for not just the right program, but the right type of organization to put an end to capitalism before it ends us. I believe that last line is also the headline for the movement for Claudia 2024, running under PSL. Um, yeah, let's see here. Let's start with, I'm going to go, there was a lot there. So I'm going to slowly try to sift through here with the right answer. Bipartisan regression and the right. The China factor. What is to be done towards a counter force? The positive changes is possible without central planning. No positive change is possible without central planning. The war economy must end. Fight against racism and oppression is essential. The time is now. Yeah, let's start with what is to be done and the China factor. Yeah, so China has been playing the long game economically through their and they do things differently from America in a way where the government controls the corporations. It doesn't own them, but it holds them accountable for fraud, for negligence, for greed. It holds them accountable, which is different from the U.S., where the government is totally lobbied by corporations, therefore sock puppets of the corporation, all these politicians. Great system we have, right? What is to be done? Well, we must change this system to a socialist system, a system that prioritizes not profit, but human health and human advancement through, we lifted up there, healthcare, education for all, basic living standards for all, among many other. These percentages about how many people are supporting socialism in America or have a likely positive view of it, just imagine if we could get all those millions of people to actually organize and come together under one socialist party. Uh, it would be its own branch of government, really. And not only that, but the key here is once you get all these people to mobilize, it spreads like wildfire. The seeds spread and sprout even more because as these people spread the message, if they have dialectical materialism and education under the belt, and they know how to spread the message, plant the seeds on other people that perhaps don't have a good view of socialism, uh, then those people turn out to have a better view of socialism when they understand that capitalism is really the issue. It is the capitalists, the enterprises, the corporations that steal from you from your hourly wages. Boss makes a dollar, I make a dime kind of mentality is fact. It's true. Uh, for all the work you do per hour and you get paid maybe a minimum wage of 15 bucks an hour, which is not a living wage, your boss is probably making 100 or 200 bucks an hour. Just think about if you work at a sneaker store or if you work at a gun assembly line, how many guns you're making an hour, how much you're getting paid an hour, and how much those items actually cost. This is an immoral system where the few rule and the state uses the military and the police to oppress not just people around the world to keep the empire afloat, but also its own people. Because you might think you have freedom, but wait until you protest something that you don't like from your state. Your freedom turns into pepper spray and batons, and perhaps other kinds of violent use of force. What they do to you. Right. So central planning. This is a big issue with the left here in America. Was non-existent because of this, because the liberals and the Democrats do such a great job at fracturing and confusing people that are well-intentioned. Uh, Instead of joining actual leftist parties that will unite together to work and mobilize together through education and through an agenda. Um, but we have to keep working on that. Obviously, it has uh, because this is the center, the eye of the empire. It's a little harder. But let's just take, for example, places like Vietnam, where Vietnamese uh, joined as a nation to reject American imperialism and fought for years. And now the Vietnamese are slowly thriving through their own long-term agenda and plan. Same with China. Let's look at something more recent like Venezuela. Why did Venezuela uh, choose Chavismo for the last couple of decades? What happened before Chavismo? Nobody ever thinks because a lot of people always say, "Oh, socialism doesn't work." Okay, then why did the people of Venezuela resort to socialism? Perhaps it was because capitalism didn't work for them, because they were at the bottom end of it. Even though they were trying to be capitalists, they were trying to replicate what the United States was doing, but it's obviously not going to go down like that. The United States and Europe steals through businesses, through what they call businesses. They steal the resources and the labor from less developed countries, nations that are trying to become independent. So what's happened with the last 2 decades with Venezuela? Before people that didn't have a proper education, with Chavismo, had a proper education. Poor people that weren't getting medical care got medical care. And what did America do because they didn't like it? Sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. Over 100 sanctions. And America and Europe also froze uh, the medical accounts of Venezuela internationally so that they couldn't buy more medicine for the people of Venezuela. This is a form of and economic terrorism generally, medical terrorism even. Uh, and it's unforgivable. It's grotesque. And this is what capitalism does to people that don't want to play along, people like Venezuela. So, me personally, I hope Maduro wins again because that would be a good indication that Venezuela will join BRICS. Unfortunately, Argentina was going to join BRICS and Milei pulled out because he's a total tool. And now the people of Argentina are worse off. The poor people are even poorer. Uh, and the rich people are getting richer in Argentina again. Good job, Milei. You ghoul. Um, so, even let's take, for example, places like, I don't know, Peru, where they had a dictator that was fully supportive of capitalism. His name was Fujimori, who just recently got out. And because of Fujimori, people in Peru aren't the best off. A lot of people are poor. Over 50% of the people are poor, and it's a capitalist system. It's not working out for them. They elected the farm workers of Peru, the laborers, elected for Peru Castillo, and Castillo got cooped. He's out. That's what capitalism does. They didn't even let him do what he wanted to do. They just totally manipulated him and pushed him out. And now he's in jail. So yeah, uh, this is why we need a central planning system, a strong movement of socialism, so that so can't get pushed out. Even in Venezuela, I think the biggest investment Maduro could have done for the Venezuelan people was to keep pushing for more education of what capitalism does and what socialism is for, and keep pushing for more medicine and keep feeding people. Education, it always goes back to education and planning. The war economy must end. So this is a crazy one for me because I like to see it as poor people in America join the military and then get shipped off to kill poorer people abroad. It's morally unjust. I once thought about joining the military, and now I am thankful I never did. For those in the military, I'm sorry. I hope you get out soon. For those planning of joining the military, please don't. It's not a good one. It's not a healthy system where every reasoning possible is given to ship people abroad, ship weapons abroad, and fund new wars all the time. America has always been at war. There's never been a time where America has been without wars. There's no such thing as a peace president. From the independence of America to slavery to the genocide of the Native Americans to Civil War, World War One, World War Two, Korean War, Vietnamese War, Middle East wars. I mean, it doesn't end. It doesn't end. Now, America being as before, using proxy wars like in Ukraine and Israel to destabilize the Middle East. Uh, it's gross. And who profits from all this death? Raytheon, perhaps, uh, CrowdStrike, Palantir, a bunch of CEOs that fund all our politicians, lobby all our politicians. So no, war is not necessary. You know what ends a war? When everybody holds their labor, when people decide to stop working. The biggest way to win a war within your own uh, within your own country is, if you're having a revolution, is to stop working. You don't even have to pick up a gun. You stop working. You stop working for the industries. You start working for each other, and all of a sudden, you have the power, the control. The labor controls everything. All right. So yes, the war economy is gross. It's immoral. It's as immoral as genocide, as what's happening up in Gaza. Fight against racism and oppression is essential. That's right. So there's a I'm not sure if this is complex or messy, but there's identity politics and then there's systemic racism. Uh, they need to be separated and looked at in different points of views, analyzed properly, to the point where we have to admit that systemic racism exists due to the capitalist system of greed and due to history. Identity politics uses these issues to personalize these differences and actually divide the people more. I think that's the best way to explain it. Identity politics is what people use to say, "I'm black, so vote for me." That's not really the point. The point is, what are you actually doing for the black community, for the Hispanic community, for minorities, for poor people, for the working class, for minimum wage workers, for people that are disadvantaged? Uh, and systemically, the most disadvantaged are minorities and women. So that is why the fight against racism and oppression is essential, because you need to end the systemic racism that is encouraged by capitalism and those in power that have generational wealth. The time is now. The time has always been now. Every 4 years, every 2 years, like the article says, they're always going to tell you this is not the time. Next time. No, this is always the time, because it's never been about electoral politics. It's always been about the labor force, the working class people uniting, regardless of what party was in charge or in power. Historically, labor movements have always moved the needle. They have always moved to create gains for the working class. Uh, from the Great Depression strikes towards winning 40 hours a week, 8-hour days, weekends, the 5-day work week, uh, no child labor, minimum wages, uh, minimum age to work, uh, ending discrimination, whether it's for minorities or sexes. These have all been won, regardless of what party was in power, by the people coalescing, uniting as one labor, as the proletariat, as the working class. When people unite, they make huge gains. Now let's think about. I think it's that half of Americans or more are living paycheck to paycheck and scared of going bankrupt. They're like one bad incident away from going bankrupt. You guys, we need to have way more solidarity with these people. We need to create bridges and explain to them, like this article simply explains, that the power is in our unification and withholding labor, or only using labor for our advantage and not for the 1%. All right. These are my thoughts. I've gone a little over an hour. Uh, Let me see if audio is still good. Here to Liberation News main page. See if there's any new articles dropping. Results of the Venezuela election. There's been a lot of propaganda against Venezuela. I really, even there's been a lot of propaganda saying that Maduro's going to lose, but why would I believe the media that is controlled by the right? Let's see what happens tomorrow. I'm hoping Maduro wins and all is good. Otherwise, I actually feel bad for a lot of poor Venezuelans suffer more under a new capitalist regime. Uh, if Maduro wins, it's going to be huge for BRICS. It's going to be for multipolarity, which I think is good. Now, don't get me wrong. This multipolarity thing drain a lot of resources, a lot of value from the American dollar eventually, which is not good for me. But as a Stoic, as a socialist, as a proletariat, I have to think about the world as a whole. Money is not the objective for me. It's living a good life and making sure everybody else lives a good life. Um, I understand that can be thought as a comment made from a position of privilege. I'm not privileged. I'm not rich. Uh, and I do give back as much as I can. So don't ask about that. uh, but I understand that where we are going, if you read the tea leaves, if you've done a study about history, socialism, capitalism, economy, geopolitics, then we are not going anywhere good with capitalism. We're still circling the drain here. Even with or without multipolarity, capitalists are total ghouls that are always going to extract as much as possible from the labor force. So we're just circling the drain like we have been for the last 5 to 6 decades now. Um, And you can see it. You can see it in the U.S. economy. You see that millennials aren't able to buy. Their dollar power is way lower. Their wages are lower, and everything else is skyrocketing for the maximum record profits of the elite. Horrible system that makes us, the workers, laborers, it pits us against each other and against even poorer people here, when it's so easy to house over 600,000 people in America when there's over 15 million vacant homes and houses and buildings that can be converted into basic income housing. Just basic housing. Just give people a room and a bathroom and somewhere to eat. You know, instead of uh, instead of criminalizing poverty, instead of criminalizing homelessness and creating uh, mass jails and mass policing that costs way more money than it would cost to just house these people. Great. So I look forward to reading on and uh, keep fighting the fight, keep informing people. Uh, don't forget to look into the description box where you can click on to Liberation News and help support them. And let's keep reading, folks. Keep spreading the love, keep spreading the energy, keep spreading the wisdom, the knowledge, and live a virtuous life. Don't forget, be good because it's good, not because you expect rewards. Have a great night.